Just looks like you went to the beach and tried panning for gold. You went to the beach anywhere. Just looks like sand. None of that pays the bills. Doesn't look like there's any gold in here.
Everyone warned Parker Schnabel to stay away from it. An old trommel, abandoned for nearly a decade, slowly rusting away in the harsh Yukon wilderness. The miners who left it behind had completely written this ground off. As far as anyone knew, it was finished. But Parker saw something different, something they had missed. If you work out the ounces we believe are still here over the years we have left, Parker explained, we need to be pulling 10,000 ounces or more every season. And when his crew finally managed to get that forgotten machine running again, it didn't just rescue their season. It exposed a layer of gold that miners had unknowingly walked over for nearly 50 years. 83 ounces from ground everyone swore was worthless. This is how it happened. In the Yukon, reputation doesn't matter. The ground doesn't care how many records you've broken, how many magazine covers you've been on, or how much gold you pulled last season. It gives what it gives, nothing more. And lately, it hadn't been giving Parker much to celebrate. The last 3 cleanups had been brutal. I'm sorry to make you guys do all that for this, Parker said after another disappointing weigh-in. Now we know, it's not the way we want to start the year. No, it's a bit problematic, especially considering how far we still have to go. Week after week, numbers that should have been climbing kept falling short. The tension in camp grew with every cleanup. Thousands of gallons of diesel were being burned, a full crew was on payroll, and precious daylight hours were slipping away, with very little gold to show for it. The last few cleanups were kind of bad, Parker admitted, frustration clear on his face. We're very short on gold, and we're very short on time. Short on time was an understatement. The Yukon mining season is brutally short, barely 5 months between thaw and freeze-up to make an entire year's income. Every day counts, every hour matters. And Parker could feel the season slipping through his fingers like water through a sluice box. The crew felt it too. Mitch Blashka, Parker's head mechanic and one of the most experienced men on site, had seen this before. When cleanup numbers drop, morale follows, Mitch explained. Guys start second-guessing decisions. Small problems turn into big arguments. If you don't turn things around fast, the whole operation can spiral. Meanwhile, Brennan Rouault had been drilling test holes across the property for weeks, searching for anything better. I'm starting to get extremely frustrated, Brennan said. Matt's got a bucket in the air half the day waiting on rock trucks. Breakdown after breakdown after breakdown. It was killing us. Most of what he found was discouraging. Small amounts of gold. Nothing that justified moving the entire operation. Then he found something unexpected. There's an area about 40 miles out, Brennan told Parker one night. Old ground. 2 different operations worked it back in the 70s and 80s. Everyone assumes it's tapped out. Parker knew the place. Every miner in the area did. 2 separate crews had worked it decades earlier, and both eventually walked away. The assumption was simple. They'd taken everything worth taking. But here's the thing, Brennan continued. I pulled samples from about 8 feet below where they were working. The old-timers were chasing big nuggets. Their equipment was basic. I don't think they could catch anything smaller than a pea. He handed Parker a test pan. The bottom was coated in fine gold. Not chunky nuggets, but a steady, consistent spread. Parker studied it quietly. You're telling me they missed this? I'm telling you their recovery methods couldn't catch it, Brennan said. This would have washed straight through their sluices. The gold had been sitting there ever since, untouched, waiting for someone with better equipment to come back for it. But it was a massive gamble. Moving the operation meant pulling resources away from known ground. It meant risking weeks of an already short season on samples that might not represent the whole cut. It meant betting everything on dirt that 2 previous crews had already given up on. Mitch didn't sugarcoat it when Parker gathered the crew. We're talking about ground that's been written off for decades, Mitch said. If those samples don't hold across the cut, we're done. We won't hit our goal. Simple as that. Parker nodded. I know the risk, but I also know we're not hitting our goal where we are now. Sometimes you have to bet on what everyone else gave up on. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. This decision would either save the season or bury it. "Get the equipment ready," Parker said. "We're moving tomorrow." Before dawn, the crew mobilized. Tyson Lee fired up the D10 dozer, cutting a new haul road into ground that hadn't seen heavy equipment in years. Excavators followed, stripping away overburden layer by layer, while the rest of the crew prepped the wash plant for its first run on the abandoned ground. The first test pans looked just like Brennan's samples. Color in every pan, consistent fine gold, and concentrations that only improved as they dug deeper. For the first time in weeks, optimism returned to camp. "Coming off a 30-ounce cleanup to 120, someone called out. "Beautiful." "Well guys, high five on that." "This is exactly what I was hoping to see," Parker said, crouched beside a freshly loaded pan. "The old-timers were digging right on top of this and had no idea it was here. They literally walked away from a fortune." Chris Hoy watched as the excavator bucket tore into the pay layer and couldn't help but grin. Maybe we should send them a thank you card. The crew laughed, the first real laugh anyone had shared in days. For the first time in a long while, things finally seemed to be turning around. Then everything fell apart. Day 2 on the new cut. Barely 14 hours into what was supposed to be their comeback, the wash plant's main drive motor seized without warning. One moment, the trommel was spinning smoothly, chewing through pay dirt just like it should. The next, a high-pitched screech of metal on metal rang across the site, and everything went dead. The silence was crushing. Mitch was under the plant within minutes, flashlight in hand, inspecting the damage. The rest of the crew stood nearby, saying little. Everyone knew that certain breakdowns could end a season on the spot. 20 minutes later, Mitch crawled out, his face grim. "Bearing cage collapsed," he said. "It's probably been wearing down for weeks and finally let go. There's metal shavings throughout the housing. The main shafts scored pretty badly. We're looking at a full teardown. And honestly, I'm not sure this motor can be saved." Parker felt his stomach drop. How long to get a replacement shipped up here? Best case, 8 days. Could be 10 or 12, depending on what's in stock. 8 days, maybe more, sitting idle while the short Yukon summer burned away. Watching the stockpile of pay dirt grow larger by the hour with no way to process it. Bleeding money on wages and equipment payments while zero gold came out of the ground. "That's not acceptable," Parker said tightly. "There has to be another option." Mitch wiped grease from his hands, thinking. Then he looked up. There might be one. About 40 miles from here, Henderson Creek. An old operation shut down years ago and left most of their equipment behind, including a trommel. Parker stared at him. A trommel that's been sitting out there, how long? 8, maybe 10 years? And you think the motor might still work? I think it's the same model series as ours. Last time I drove past, the housing looked intact. And I think it's either that, or we sit here for 2 weeks watching our season disappear. Mitch shrugged. Your call. There wasn't really a choice. Hook up the flatbed, Parker said. We leave in 20 minutes. The abandoned site looked like a graveyard for mining dreams. Rusted equipment lay scattered across the clearing, slowly being swallowed by years of unchecked vegetation. Collapsed sluice runs sat coated in moss. Fuel tanks streaked with orange corrosion, likely leaking into the soil beneath them. Hoppers riddled with holes from years of weather and neglect. And in the middle of it all, half hidden by brush, sat the trommel. The drum was visibly warped from years of freeze and thaw cycles. Several panels had rusted completely through, leaving gaps big enough to stick a fist through. The frame leaned awkwardly where the ground beneath it had shifted over time, but the motor housing at the rear looked solid. No cracks, no holes. The mounting brackets appeared intact. That's what we're here for, Mitch said, pointing. If the internals aren't completely seized, we might actually have a shot. The next 4 hours were spent fighting rust and mud. Bolts that hadn't moved in nearly a decade refused to budge. Some were so corroded they had to be cut off with a torch, sending sparks flying into the wet grass. Others required a 4-foot breaker bar and every ounce of strength the crew could muster. Several bolt heads sheared clean off, forcing them to drill out what remained. Brennan sliced his palm open on jagged, rusted metal and wrapped it with electrical tape so he could keep working. Chris got sprayed in the face with old hydraulic fluid when an unseen line burst. Tyson nearly dropped the winch cable when a mounting bracket snapped without warning. But bolt by bolt, piece by piece, they freed the motor. They winched it onto the flatbed, strapped it down tight, and hauled it back to the main site as fast as the rough roads allowed. That's when the real work began. The salvaged motor wasn't a perfect fit. The mounting brackets didn't line up. Bolt patterns were different. The shaft coupling needed custom adapters. The electrical system had to be completely rewired. 18 straight hours of work followed. No sleep. Coffee pots emptied and refilled until nobody was counting. Exhaustion set in, tempers frayed, and every small setback felt like a disaster. At one point, a mounting bracket Mitch had spent 2 hours fabricating snapped the moment they torqued it down. Chris threw his wrench across the work area. "This is insane. We're wasting time trying to make this junk work. We should shut everything down and wait for the new motor." "We don't have time to wait," Parker snapped back, his patience gone. "Every day we sit here doing nothing costs us $8,000. Either help fix this or stay out of the way." The two men locked eyes, exhaustion and frustration crackling between them as the future of the season hung in the balance. Brennan stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "Everyone take 10 minutes. Get some air, drink some water, then we're finishing this." Nobody argued. The crew spread out, finding quiet corners to cool off and reset. When they regrouped, the tension had dropped just enough to get back to work. 4 more hours followed. Careful, methodical work. Shimming, aligning, testing connections, triple checking every bolt, bracket, and wire. "We've got the harness in and everything secured," Mitch said. "Jenko's grabbing the drive shaft now. Next step is craning it into place." Finally, Mitch stepped back and studied the reassembled powertrain. "That's it," he said. "That's everything I can do." The crew gathered around as Parker moved to the main switch, his hand hovering over the controls. "Moment of truth," Mitch said quietly. Parker flipped the switch. For a split second, that felt like an hour. Nothing happened. Then the salvaged motor came to life. The belt engaged, tension built. The trommel drum began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, until it reached full operating speed. Water pressure surged, and the wash plant roared back to life. The crew erupted. Cheers echoed across the site. Exhausted hugs, shouts of relief. Chris and Parker clasped hands, their argument from hours earlier completely forgotten. Brennan pumped his fist in the air. Tyson stood there laughing, too tired and too relieved to do anything else. That abandoned motor, the one everyone had written off as worthless scrap, had just saved their season. With the plant running again, the crew attacked the stockpile of pay dirt like everything depended on it. Because it did. Excavators fed material into the hopper around the clock. The salvaged motor ran nonstop, without a single complaint. It was as if it had spent the last decade waiting for someone to give it purpose again. The crew rotated shifts, keeping the operation running nearly 20 hours a day, pushing the equipment as hard as they dared. The first cleanup after repairs came in at 14.3 ounces. Solid numbers, respectable production, but nothing spectacular. "That's a good start," Parker said carefully as he watched Brennan work the scale. "But one cleanup doesn't prove anything. We need to see if this ground holds over multiple runs." The second cleanup told a different story. 19.7 ounces, nearly 40% better than the first. As they dug deeper, the gold concentration kept increasing. "They were chasing nuggets," Parker explained, holding up a pan loaded with fine gold. Their sluice boxes were built to catch big pieces. Anything smaller than a match head washed right through. The fine gold settled into cracks and crevices in the bedrock and stayed there. 50 years of gold, just sitting untouched, waiting for equipment capable of recovering it. The third cleanup changed everything. 26.4 ounces in a single week. At gold prices hovering around $2,300 an ounce, that one cleanup was worth more than $60,000. From ground every miner in the Yukon had written off as worthless. Mitch walked over for the final weigh-in, still covered in grease after babysitting the salvaged motor through another week of non-stop operation. "Not bad for a piece of junk that was rusting in the woods," he said, a tired grin spreading across his face. Parker allowed himself a rare smile. Not bad at all. The crew ran that cut for 3 more weeks, pulling every ounce they could before the pay layer finally began to thin. When it was over, the numbers were undeniable. 83.2 ounces total. At current market prices, that translated to more than $191,000. From abandoned ground 2 previous operations had walked away from, using a motor everyone said would never run again. The salvaged motor held. The discarded ground delivered. And Parker's season total climbed to 412 ounces, putting him within real striking distance of his $1 million goal. But the math is still tight. With just 6 weeks left before freeze-up shuts everything down, Parker still needs another 93 ounces to cross that threshold. The big question now is whether this rediscovered pay streak can keep producing, or if they've already pulled the richest material. One thing is no longer up for debate. That abandoned Trommel motor, dismissed by every miner in the region as scrap, saved Parker's season. And the ground everyone walked away from decades ago proved that gold still hides in places people stopped looking. The Yukon always keeps its secrets beneath the surface. The only question now is whether there's enough time left to find them.